The book of Genesis, and more broadly Exodus, is a story about brothers and what makes a family. In the beginning, God creates the first family with Adam and Eve, who are meant to be the family of God as his children. But these two are then expelled from the garden and have, among others, two sons, Cain and Abel. Before the Bible has had time to put on its shoes and really get going, we're treated to a story of fratricide and the first murder when Cain kills his brother. The family of God broke down when Adam and Eve, in their freedom to choose, chose disobedience to freedom and became slaves of sin. Then the consolation prize for this betrayal was the family of Adam, now torn asunder by the first murder. Next, we see Isaac and Ishmael, two brothers, one the child of the promise, one the child of infidelity. God chooses Abraham to do and be what Adam could not, and then he goes the same path, lacking trust in God to deliver him a son. He laid with Hagar, inspiring the resentment for the son that she bore. And Ishmael is cast out in favor of Isaac, and the two only ever meet again to bury their father. Isaac himself has two sons, Esau and Jacob. Jacob swindles his twin out of his birthright and tricks his father into giving him his brother's blessing, leaving Esau with little. They reunite many years later, but Jacob was afraid that his brother would try to kill him for what he did. Esau was coming to greet him with a detachment of 400 men, after all. It's when Jacob makes restitution to his brother that he is visited by that angel that he wrestles with and that names him Israel. The next morning, he sees his brother and is afraid. Imagine fighting an angel and still being afraid of your brother. But Esau runs to greet his brother, kissing him, calling him brother repeatedly. And Jacob, for his part, is much stiffer, referring to himself in the formal, polite language of your servant. Jacob offers Esau restitution for what he did wrong, and Esau accepts it. But when Esau offers Jacob more favors, out of what seems to be his genuine brotherly affection, Jacob declines, not wanting to owe him anything. But Jacob tells his brother that seeing his face is like seeing the face of God, now that they are at peace. The family begins to heal. But then Jacob goes and has 12 sons who repay him for the treachery that he paid his father. If so far it has been 2 sons who cause problems, imagine what 12 must be capable of. I mean, really, these guys get into some crazy stuff, some of which is not appropriate for the pulpit. Now, at the time, the youngest son was Joseph, who was the only son of his wife Rachel, and he was a favorite. As the eldest child myself, I speak with firsthand knowledge that the babies of the family receive an astonishing amount of favor. Even when, like Joseph, they are spoiled, arrogant brats. And I know my little brother is not watching online, so I can get away with this. And reading the Old Testament, you'd think that the whole thing was written by the youngest child. It's always the younger one who comes out on top. Ishmael and Isaac, Esau and Jacob, Joseph and his brothers, Moses and Aaron. And what do the oldest get? We get the final plague in Exodus. The system is rigged, but I digress. Joseph is given his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, a sign of his favor, and then also begins to receive visions from God. These visions are the last straw for his brothers. It's here that the story actually splits into 2 versions. In one version, his brothers leave him for dead, and his brother Reuben, the eldest, goes back to rescue him only to find that he's gone. Assumed dead, he was found by some Midianites and taken into slavery. The other version of the story involves his brother Judah selling him into slavery to some Ishmaelites, who then take him into Egypt. We're not sure why we're given two versions of the story, but some believe it's an attempt on the author's part to equate murder and kidnapping. In either case, Joseph ends up in Egypt as a slave, and through a level of twist seen elsewhere only in daytime soap operas, Joseph becomes viceroy of Egypt. And those terrible brothers of his must come to beg him for food because of the drought, food that Joseph had because his visions prepared him. Now, if you have ever been in that sweet, wonderful position of telling your sibling, "I told you so," then you have some idea of the satisfaction Joseph must have felt. The only thing better than saying, "I told you so," is hearing them say, "You were right." If I could bottle that, I'd be a millionaire. But that satisfaction is swiftly turned into a sense of wonder. So just before today's reading picks up, we see that Joseph felt similarly, and he had tried to keep his younger brother Benjamin, but Judah offered himself to be a slave for the release of his brother. Judah, remember, is the one that sold Joseph into slavery, and now here he is offering to become a slave himself in order to rescue his youngest brother. Here now are gone are the boys who callously sold him into slavery, and here now are men who value their father's last years more than their own freedom. And just before the reading today picks up, the text says that Joseph could no longer control himself and tells everyone but his brothers to get out. And then he says to them, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" He said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt, and now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here." And then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, while Benjamin wept upon his neck. And this is the same phrase used in the Jacob-Esau story. And he kissed all of his brothers and wept upon them. And thus Joseph reconciles with his brothers. And all of the house of Israel dwells in Egypt. And Genesis, for the most part, ends with a happy ending. The family of God together again with peace at the last. But then Exodus picks up with, "Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph." The Hebrews are enslaved, and quickly, for those who do not know, baby Moses was put into a basket to avoid being killed by Pharaoh and ends up being adopted by none other than Pharaoh himself. But then Moses learns of his true identity. And everything that we have learned about family in Genesis comes back into play as Moses gives up all of the riches of Egypt to free his people from slavery. Where Joseph began a slave to become a king, Moses begins a king to become a slave. Because the promise of God was never that the children of Israel would dwell in slavery, but that they would be his people and that he would be their God. And so now the family of God must flee Egypt, to which they first ran for safety. And Moses must give up the only family he's ever really known for the family to which he truly belongs. Joseph had to give up the idea of the family that he remembered for the family that stood before him, weeping bitterly for the brother that they thought they killed. Throughout these narratives of brothers and family, we see over and over again that God is keen to surprise us. Things are rarely as they seem. But at the end of the day, the important thing is that despite our infidelity, our lack of trust, our envy, our hatred, bitterness, or strife, God will get his way, with or without us. And if you don't believe me, ask Pharaoh. And in all of these narratives, we find that the original promise God made Abraham continues to take many forms, but never once does it stop being true. God told Abraham he'd make him a father of many nations, and that his children will be his people, and he will be their God. And then the Bible uses the stories of brothers to flesh out that promise until finally the promise is fully fleshed out in the person of Jesus, our brother. who makes us heirs with him to the promise. By his presence in the flesh, Christ has made us brothers and sisters. Like Esau running to Jacob, he greets us with joy, disregarding our sin because he only wants to be near us. Like the brothers of Joseph who attempted to kill him, and we now must face him in our guilt while he greets us with his grace. Just as Moses gave up the riches of Egypt, so Christ gave up the glories of heaven to become a slave for our sake, that he might lead us from the slavery of our own Egypt into the promised land and to the kingdom prepared for us from the foundation of the world.